Argentina joining NATO and sending F-16s to Ukraine.
Evidently, sanctions are not enough. When are they going to stop it?
President Fernandez told Putin that Argentina could become an entering door for Russia.
The question about where you stand towards Ukraine has to do with where you stand towards human rights.
Oh, we have an air alarm. That's very on time. Latin America and the Caribbean is the top priority for Ukraine's foreign policy this year, according to Ukraine's Ministry for Foreign Affairs. Argentina seems to be one of the Ukraine's top reliable partners in the region. And today we're going to discuss just that with our guest, Carolina Amoroso, Argentinian TV presenter and journalist. My name is Alina Hrytsenko. I'm an international relations expert, and this is Talking Substance. Thank you very much, Carolina, for participating in our podcast. Welcome. It's good to see you.
Thank you very much for having me.
I would like to start with discussing a little bit about perception of Ukraine in Argentina and Latin America. So how people actually understand Ukraine in Argentina, how people understand this war between Russia and Ukraine. Probably a lot of people just knew about Ukraine and just found out about Ukraine's existence, actually, because it's understandable to different continents and to different parts of the world. But it's also interesting to get to know a little bit in details. Do people actually understand the roots of this war between Russia and Ukraine, or is it more about just through the lenses of the relations between the West and the East, between the U.S. and Russia, for example? So what are the trends currently, and what are the trends in Argentina in particular?
That's a great question, because actually, even in my personal case, I had some understanding of what had been going on in Ukraine, but it wasn't up until the start of the large-scale invasion that I fully understood the scale of the conflict and how it went back, way before I imagined. I went to Ukraine. I've been to Ukraine 4 times. My first time was in February 2022, right at the beginning of the full-scale invasion. And we as journalists, the ones who have had the chance to cover this war, we have also had an opportunity and a responsibility that has to do with giving, it had to do during this more than 2 years, and it still has to do with giving the full historical context to this conflict. So in Argentina, there was a very vague understanding of what had been going on between Ukraine and Russia that had a lot to do with that lens that you're talking about. But the full-scale invasion changed everything, in the sense that it drew so much interest to the specific timeline of this conflict, and the specific aspects that explained Ukrainian society and that explained Ukrainian resistance. And from that, we had the chance as journalists to talk about specificity, to talk about things that were totally ignored about Ukrainian history. And I'm talking about the Holodomor, and I'm talking about things that were, up until then, pretty much unknown here or not talked about here. So we had the chance, and I think that has come across. It doesn't happen with every conflict, but with this one, it did. We did have the opportunity to send that message. We had a chance to tell people that this war was about existence and identity, that there was a power struggle behind it, that there was, of course, there were and there are aspects that have to do with the power dynamics in the world, but the essence of this war has to do with Ukrainian identity. And I think we've managed to get that across. In other countries in Latin America, it's true. You're totally right about what you're saying. this is basically there's basically this understanding that Ukraine is like a proxy of the United States, and that this has actually more to do with the power struggle that I talked about. But in Argentina, because we also had a big Ukrainian diaspora, but because people had so much empathy to what Ukraine was going through, we had the opportunity, and I think we managed to get the message across, to tell the specificity of the conflict and to talk about what was at stake for Ukrainian people.
Yeah, well, I can get that. How about what is your take, and what do people in Argentina and Latin America think about the resolution of this war, and in particular the peace summit that was organized by Ukraine and Switzerland last month in June? Taking into account also the stance of Argentina and the current news that are circulating in the media, that Argentina is also ready to support Ukraine with military equipment. Do people support such radical actions, or is it more about like peace negotiations? Please, Ukraine, Russia, sit at the table and please negotiate about something just to find a peaceful resolution to this war?
There's a lot of solidarity in Argentina towards Ukraine. I would say if you take all of the main guidelines of Milei's foreign policy, I would say the most supported stand has to do with the position towards Ukraine. There's a pretty big consensus that Russian aggression is there's no way around it but to condemn it. Like there is no serious voice today in Argentinian, I would say, in like the public conversation that would stand for the Russian aggression. And that, I think, has to do with how the war or the full-scale invasion was covered, how people got the perspective and the full perspective of the criminality of the aggression, and of the illegitimacy of it, and of the fabrications that try to justify the aggression. But I think, like, if I had to tell you what we have, we certainly have a controversial president in terms of the stands that people have towards Milei and his foreign policy and his way to thinking about international relations. But in terms of the position towards Ukraine and the conflict in Ukraine, I think he's got a lot of support, even from people who don't support it. There's no real serious debate here on to whether we condemn the Russian Federation or not. That's not something that's discussed in Argentina, because people are in very deep solidarity with Ukrainian people. Whether this will eventually translate into actual military help, that I don't know, because Argentina is going through a very deep economic crisis. So anything that has to do with increasing public spending or with sending resources from Argentina to any other country right now might be a sensitive issue. But that, I think, has more to do with the domestic problems and the conversations that are going on inside Argentina than with our stand towards Ukraine. In terms of what happened in the peace summit, I would say, the position was supported. It expressed pretty much what Argentinian people think, like with the vast majority. You can't talk for all Argentinian people, but it expressed what the vast majority of the Argentinian people think. people here are appalled by what's going on. Like, I just covered or just showed what the pictures and the videos and all the footage from the attack on the children's hospital, and the reaction you get from people is total condemnation. They are appalled. And the main question is, when are they going to stop him? When are they going to stop this? Uh, Evidently, it hasn't been enough with what they've done so far. Evidently, sanctions are not enough. When are they going to stop it? So I think although of course distance is there, and it is, for Ukraine, it is very far away. I think for some reason, or for various reasons, there's a lot of empathy and there's a lot of solidarity towards Ukraine right now in Argentina. And I don't think any other stand towards this conflict from any other president would be supported by the people. People, even from like left-wing orientations, are very much in condemnation of what Russia is doing.
It's really interesting because when I found out about Milei's position towards Ukraine and when he became the president, I thought that it might be a little bit confusing for people because President Fernandez used to take like a neutrality stance, which is absolutely understandable, more about balancing between US, Russia, and China as well, hedging the risks, which was also understandable. Argentina was making its path to BRICS as well. And then all of a sudden it changed. It's such a rapid change in foreign policy in terms of the West, in terms of Ukraine as well. I thought that might be a little bit confusing for the people. So that's why it's really interesting to hear that the level of solidarity and empathy within the society is so high.
Yes, it is very high. It is impossible to ignore that we've had a president that a couple weeks before the beginning of the large-scale invasion actually told Putin that we could be the entering door for Russia into Latin America. Like they need an entering door, like they don't already have Nicaragua, Cuba, Venezuela. But anyway, and that's something that really comes back to haunt former President Alberto Fernandez. But then right after that, even in the previous administration, that was, as you say, very ambiguous towards this conflict. Even in that administration, there was a clear stand that the invasion was condemned by Argentina, that this was a violation of Ukrainian sovereignty, and that was like out of the question. And I think it had to do with the huge interest that people had in following up what was going on with this war, and like I say, the very strong solidarity that people expressed towards Ukraine, and it was to me, it was very surprising. Like, my coverage of Ukraine totally changed my career, and I think it had to do with us acting, like journalists in general, acting, the ones who were covering the war, acting as solidarity bridges or empathy bridges between the reality of Ukraine and its people and the Argentinian audience. And I think that has to do with the way the conflict in Ukraine resonated with Argentinian people. The question about where you stand towards Ukraine has to do with where you stand towards human rights, where you stand towards international law, where you stand towards identity, where you stand towards a country that has been oppressed and whose identity has been erased by another country with like imperialistic objectives, like, and that was so clear to people. I would say from the beginning of the very massive media coverage, that was so clear to people that it really wasn't hard to get them to empathize with the Ukrainian cause and the Ukrainian resistance. Like I say, we as Argentinians know very deep in our hearts what it is to embrace human rights and the defense of the right to exist with our identities, with our very diverse identities, because we are granddaughters and grandchildren of people who have escaped from wars, who have escaped from persecution. So we perfectly know what it is to fight for a place and for the safety of being able to be who you are and to celebrate your identity. Like I say, it wasn't hard for people to empathize, and I think that had a correlation with what was going on in politics. Even for those who wanted a more ambiguous stand, there was no way around it. People weren't gonna accept anything but condemnation.
So you mentioned that President Fernandez told Putin that Argentina could become an entering door for Russia. But is it possible that Argentina can now become an entering door for Ukraine to Latin America? Because this year, Latin America and the Caribbean is a top priority for Ukrainian foreign policy, according to the Ministry for Foreign Affairs. I believe that Argentina and perhaps Chile are now two most Ukraine-friendly countries in Latin America.
Well, I certainly think that's already happening. I'm following up a lot of what's going on in terms of justice and accountability towards war crimes committed in Ukraine. And there is a complaint that's been filed in Argentinian justice and in an Argentinian court that has to do with human rights violations committed in Ukraine. That's because of it's a particular system that we have here in Argentina, and other countries have it as well. It's called international jurisdiction, where Argentina can investigate and judge crimes against humanity that have been committed in a foreign country by foreign perpetrators towards a foreign victim. That's something that can be done. And there has been a complaint filed in Argentinian justice that has to do with something that happened in Ukraine during the beginning of the large-scale invasion. So I would say Argentina is already being an ally of Ukraine in the region because of this solidarity, because of the very vast and interesting Argentinian history of accountability, of the defense of human rights. Aside from the fact that the whole human rights cause in Argentina was very it's kind of intertwined with political stands and political positions, but taking that, putting that aside, I would say that aside from the political use, the human rights cause is a very important cause for Argentinian people. And I think that would certainly be an area of opportunity to draw and to strengthen this connection between Argentina and Ukraine. I think that's already happening in terms of that alliance, like you say. It's already happening, but I think it's happening in a more horizontal level. It's happening. It's happening between the people, and it's happened from the first moment the large-scale invasion started. I wouldn't say it went back to 2014. People didn't know. People weren't that aware of what's going on with the illegal annexation of Crimea. That didn't come across as something as existential as the large-scale invasion. Not here in Argentina. But I would say from February 2022, that has already started, and it has started at the level of the people and their solidarity with the cause.
Did you think that such a summit like Ukraine Latin America can be potentially organized, and perhaps that will be also a chance for President Milei to prove Argentinian leadership in the region as well?
Yeah, I think that could certainly happen. Malay is working very hard in his international brand, I would say that. So, even from a strategic political perspective, I would say that is something that's possible, feasible, because Argentina has a history of organizing big summits. Like we organized the G20 in 2018. And from a more like, from a more strategic perspective, I think it might be something that Millet might want to do, might have some incentives to do, and I think it would be interesting for the region as well. We are a region that is sort of connected to the big debates that are going on in Ukraine or that have to do with the Ukrainian conflict. What am I trying to say with this? We have autocratic regimes in our region, so we have that tension between liberal democracies that, of course, have problems and that have a lot of social debts in terms of a huge population, huge parts of the population that are in poverty. We have a big problem. We have had over the course of the past decade, big problems with political corruption. But aside from that, there is a big tension all across the region between liberal, imperfect liberal democracies, but liberal democracies and autocratic regimes. When I talk about autocratic regimes, of course, I'm talking about three main allies of Russia, Cuba, Venezuela, and Nicaragua. We have some upcoming elections in Venezuela. Let's see what happens with that. But I'm very skeptical about it. But let's see what happens. But what I'm trying to say here is that the debate or the tension, the background behind the Ukrainian-Russian conflict has a lot to do with some of the debates that are going on in Latin America right now, and that have been going on over the course of the last couple of years. I would even say over the course of the past decade and a half. Are we willing to defend liberal democracies? And I think with Argentina, although we have some very deep and polarized political scenario, we have already answered that question.
I was asking about how the peace summit and the war was actually covered in the media because I was thinking about countering Russian disinformation in the region, because here in Ukraine, we have this understanding that Russian media presence in the region is quite widespread. Is this a stereotype, or is this something, the reality that the region is facing, that Russian disinformation is indeed that powerful?
I would say this. There's a before and after reality when you talk about the beginning of the large-scale invasion. Because before, basically, a lot of the information that was coming from that part of the world was coming through propaganda. But after the large-scale invasion, or once the large-scale invasion started, we had some huge coverage from professional international media and professional national media, like the one I work in. And people had the chance to actually confront those coverages with what propaganda had been telling them for so many years. And right now, I would say it's even taken as something grotesque. Like, of course, there are some people that tend to believe it, but those are the people that tend to even deny the undeniable, because they're almost like religiously compelled to believing whatever the Russian propaganda apparatus tells them, because of they're too much, they're taken by their ideology to a level where facts don't matter anymore. But putting those people aside, whom you can't convince of anything, I would say there's the penetration of Russian propaganda was a lot larger before the beginning of the large scale invasion, because now there's something to confront it. After February 2022, there was something to confront Russian propaganda, and those were professional coverages of the war and of the conflict. You still have, some people in social media telling you, oh, but that wasn't a Russian missile. That was the Ukrainian air defense that hit the hospital. And you're like, well, there's actual, footage, and there's actual pictures of the intact missile going directly into the hospital. And even if you don't want to believe this, I will show you my footage of Izium. I will show you my footage of Bucha. I would show you my footage of Posad Pokrovsky, and you will see that civilian objectives are right at the center of the strategy. Horror is right at the center of the strategy. War crimes are right at the center of the strategy in this war. But yeah, if you are confronted with professional coverage, with objective reporting, I think people tend to draw away from the discourse and the narratives that propaganda has installed for so many years. But I do want to say this: I don't underestimate propaganda, because it fills in a void, like an empty space. Propaganda is always there. When professional media draw away from coverage and interest in a particular topic, they remain there. They are very persistent, and they should not be underestimated, because they can penetrate into in those places where there's like an empty spot or an emptiness in terms of narrative. So I wouldn't underestimate them, but I would say that there's two different realities before and after February 2022.
Okay, so I have only one last question that I would like to ask, and that has nothing to do with Ukraine, but it has to do with Argentina and NATO, because one of the most fresh piece of news circulating in Ukrainian media is about Argentina joining NATO and sending F-16s to Ukraine. So I would like to ask you about because from what I understand, we're not talking about becoming a member state of NATO, but we're talking about joining the global partnership. So what's the motivation, and how do people actually what's the attitude in the society towards such an initiative about joining NATO in terms of global partnership?
Well, I do think Milei is bold in terms of his foreign policy. I would think everyone can agree with me on this. Some people would use other adjectives. I mean, I think it has a lot to do in this particular aspect. I would separate it from the general position of Argentina towards Ukraine and the position that President Milei expressed at the Peace Summit. This other initiative, which I think is still far from becoming a reality, I have my doubts that would become a reality. But in case it does, in case they move forward with this initiative, I think it has more to do with Milei's intention to align Argentina with the United States in a very clear and obvious and non-ambiguous way than with the solidarity towards Ukraine. You get what I'm saying? I'm not saying the solidarity is not real. It is very real, and it is very clear from this administration and from Argentinian people in general. But I think this particular aspect that you asked me about has a lot to do with alignment policies in terms of foreign policy.
Okay. Thank you very much for joining us today. Thank you very much, Carolina.
Thank you very much for having me. And well, I read the Kyiv Post all the time, so I'm very flattered to be here.
Thank you. Thank you very much. Oh, we have an air alarm. That's very on time.
Okay.
Just a moment.
Terrible.
So it seems that Argentina is the perfect entering door for Ukraine in the region that can help us strengthen our positions in Latin America and the Caribbean. This is Talking Substance. Please make sure to like, comment, and subscribe to our channel.